Welcome to the Business Blast Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Wagner. This episode is brought to you by Authors Unite. Authors Unite provides you with the support you need to finish your book. Best part is, after you finish your book, they take care of the entire publishing and marketing process 100% for you. So, if you want to become a successful author, make sure to check out authorsunite.com. Now, let's jump into the episode. All right, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Business Blast Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Wagner. Have a good old friend of mine, Dan Rosenberg, with us. He's in his second year. He's a law student at Georgetown University with a focus in business law. He is also interning in the SEC's Division of Enforcement this semester. So welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me, Tyler, and it's good to hear from you.
Yes, man, you too. This is exciting. Always love having some friends on the show. So let's jump in, Dan. The first one I got for you is, what is the best story from your life that has an underlying valuable message?
It's a good question, Tyler. And before I dive into it, I have one disclaimer, which is that the views I express in this interview are mine alone and are not reflective of the United States government. So now that I got that over with, I'm going to dive into the answer to your question.
Love that.
So I thought about this, and I had some pretty acute adjustment issues in college. The root causes of that really came down to not knowing who I was, and that manifested itself in, some pretty low self-esteem, low self-confidence, and it also affected how I ate. I didn't eat enough, and I was also engaging in extreme exercising. And so, the abstract lesson is it's really important to know yourself and affirm who that is and have confidence in your idiosyncrasies, your strengths and your weaknesses. And that's really, I think, essential to success, and how that actually has practical implications in my arena, which is, a law school student and someone who's engaging in the legal market for jobs, is that knowing yourself is essential to crushing your interview. Because you got to figure out how to articulate your narrative in a compelling, sophisticated, and persuasive way. And, that doesn't really happen unless you know who you are truly and mapping your strengths and your weaknesses onto what the position requires. And then in terms of studying, the actual part of being a law school student, there's really no singular formula for success. Everybody learns differently. So what works for you might not work for others. And having the courage to realize that difference and to explore it and to put it in practice is really important.
Yeah, man. I agree. I'll tell you, studying got harder and harder for me as I got older. So it is definitely different for everyone. So I'm excited for your answer on this one, just because, on this podcast, we don't have many law students. So what is the most valuable piece of information we should know that is within your expertise or industry?
Counterintuitively, Tyler, it's actually listening, because, the legal profession is being famous for, in terms of how it's portrayed as people in a courtroom and just delivering these fantastic arguments and, their charisma and their communication style. But the most savvy lawyers are the ones who have the best listening skills, because really, to serve your clients in a sophisticated way, you have to understand what the nature of their problem is, and also the scope. And that also implies a process, asking them questions, asking them follow-up questions, making sure you have the entire picture. And particularly for me, who's about to, start at a law firm in about a year, the young associates tend to be supportive. What they do is they support the partners and the more senior associates, and you don't interact too much with the clients, and they rely on your work product. So understanding what it is they want and how they want it is really key to success, because they're people and just not machines you're creating your work product for.
And what is your best piece of overall business advice, so not necessarily industry specific?
I'd say this is actually even true for the law, but the importance of cultivating and building relationships, because, people move the world and also move companies, not companies in and of themselves. And I think the key to working successfully with people is building relationships, because at its core, I think building relationships starts creating, establishing a sense of trust between you and someone else. And, there are a couple corollaries to that. I'd say that it's important that you shouldn't build relationships in a utilitarian way. And you have to do it genuinely, because I think people can sense when you're faking it. Building relationships definitely takes work, continued effort, and it doesn't happen overnight. And then going back to listening, it's really amazing what you learn if you truly give people the space to talk about themselves and make them feel comfortable, just in terms of, their verbal communication, but also their body language.
And if you could give your younger self one piece of advice, what would that be?
I'd say, don't let fear prevent you from doing anything. Go after what you want and do it with conviction.
And kind of going a little bit down a different path, in your opinion, what is the key to happiness?
So it's funny you should ask this, because I was listening to a TED Talk, and the title of the TED Talk, in case you or anybody else wants to look it up, is "What Makes a Good Life: Lessons from the Longest Study on Happiness." And I pretty much agree with it, because it communicates what I think leads to happiness in a very succinct way. And it's actually, in terms of the study itself, it's the longest study ever performed. It's about a 70-year longitudinal study. And so a group of researchers at Harvard focused on two groups: Harvard college graduates in one group and people from Boston's poorest neighborhoods on the other. And they try to determine, in a cross-cutting way, what was sort of the key driver of happiness. And it really came down to, and before I say that, they looked at health records, they interviewed these people, they interviewed their significant others, and it comes down to quality relationships. So I think, cultivating a diverse and wide network is important, professionally and personally.
Could not agree more. And what is the best book that you've read, and what was the number one thing you learned from that?
So I read a book a couple years ago by Doris Kearns Goodwin. She's like a pretty prominent historian, and it's called Team of Rivals. And it's pretty much about the political genius of Abraham Lincoln, which is interesting because he's, definitely one of the most influential leaders in recent history. What I took from that was, among other things, there's really so much that Abraham Lincoln did well. The ability to convey what you want to convey in the most precise and accurate terms is a very powerful tool for inspiring others and just getting across what you want to get across.
And what is your favorite quote and why?
So if you ever make it down to, or up rather, to Washington, D.C., which I hope you do sometime, there's this quote actually on the World War II memorial, and it's about the Battle of Midway. And it goes like this. They had no right to win, yet they did. And in doing so, they changed the course of a war. Even against the greatest of odds, there is something in the human spirit, a magic blend of skill, faith, and valor that can lift men from certain defeat to incredible victory. So what I like about that quote is I think it really does highlight something that I've noticed. And I think the human spirit is something, very special. And there's not much we can't do if we really put our minds to it and we have the tenacity and the grit to get through it.
Yes, man, dude. And I would love to come up, man. So thanks again for coming on. The last one I have for you before we let you go is, where's the best place for our listeners to connect with you online?
LinkedIn is the best place, and, always happy to chat. So, thanks for having me on, Tyler.
Of course, man. Thanks again for jumping on.
The podcast you just heard was published with Anchor. Got something you want to say to the creator of this show? Send them a voice message using the Anchor app, free for iOS and Android.